funding of potential proposal, but we're not. We actually get funded.
Oh, excellent.
What? It looked like he was like killing a rat or something.
They haven't committed to it, and that's the question everyone's asking.
How many?
Are you going
20, I think.
in other school districts or whatever? It's
Check.
to explain it more. It's that
Josh just showed me. He just hand signed it.
1 minute warning.
that'll be okay.
Hand signed.
Okay, it is 7 o'clock. I will call us to order. I would like to acknowledge that the Board of Education acknowledges that we are on the traditional territories of the Comox First Nation. We would like to thank them for the privilege of living on their land and the gift of working with their children. I would also remind everyone that public board meetings are recorded and live streamed on the school district's YouTube channel. Adoption of the agenda. Recommendation is that the Board of Education adopt the September 1st, 2020 regular board meeting agenda with the addition, please, of a letter from the CDTA. Are there any other additions or,
Can I ask for clarification, Mr. Chair?
please?
I'm just wondering, and I could be board procedural. Under my two motions came out of last board meeting, and I'm wondering, should they not be under old business, or are they fine with under old business? I'm just asking clarification because we were talking about the funding, we were talking about the alternative, and we ran out of time. So I'm just wondering if they should be under old business or they're just board procedure process.
Yeah, I don't recall them being on the agenda last time. Sorry, Janice.
Okay, but my understanding.
You had a motion that was passed.
Yes, and I know that Trustee McDonald had two motions that we couldn't add to her that way because she wasn't there on that one there.
Correct.
So it's my and I could be wrong, but I thought it was sort of, we covered it in part of last board meeting, and on that one there. So
I don't.
okay,
I see it as new business
Doesn't
because
matter.
it wasn't addressed at the last board.
okay,
meeting.
thank you. I just wanted clarification. Thank you.
Any other clarifications required? Requested? Okay, then I seek a motion to accept the agenda. Thank you, Trustee Farley. Seconded, Trustee Howe. Board meeting minutes recommended that the Board of Education adopt the August 20th, 2020 regular board meeting minutes as presented. Any omissions? Corrections? Concerns? Seeing none, I would seek a motion to accept the minutes. Moved Trustee Oxby and seconded Trustee Howe. Old business.
Excuse me,
Yes.
when we have a motion first and second, don't we have to vote?
Sure.
Just thinking that we do, right?
All
Yeah,
those
yeah.
in favor of that motion? There we go.
Okay, thanks.
You're very
Sheila.
welcome. Now, old business, we have none. Report on in-camera meetings, September 1st, 2020. We did have one. There was discussion of a couple of matters regarding location for our meetings and such, and how our meetings would transpire in future. Board Chair's report. My Chair's report tonight is going to be a little different. I only have two items, a quick explanation and a short share. I have never been one who felt that the community should know or simply understand all of the procedural processes and workings of the board, but I do feel it incumbent upon us to explain them when it is clear that the public doesn't understand something about board procedures. It became clear to me from the emails I received over the last week that the public did not understand board procedural policy regarding regular board meetings, regular public meetings. 4.15 is the policy number, or its importance to good decision making. 4.15 states all meetings shall stand adjourned at 9 p.m. or 2 hours after the commencement, whichever comes first. Meetings may continue to a specified or unspecified time, provided that the members present at the meeting unanimously resolve continuation. The sole intention of Policy 4.15 is to try and prevent trustees from making bad decisions based on the fact that they are too tired to debate them effectively or exhausted by a trustee dominating debate until everyone is so tired that they simply agree in order to go home. Decision by exhaustion. A unanimous vote rather than a simple majority is required, as it is both hoped and expected that out of 7 trustees, 1 would have the sense to say no. For any decision that is that important, there is absolutely nothing preventing the board from adjourning and reconvening the meeting the next day when everyone is rested, has had time and a clear head to think and even research their argument. And there is rarely a reason to rush to decision. It also means that those who actually do the work of the board and who have already worked a 12-hour day are not kept there so late that they are exhausted the next day when they need to be freshest to actually do the work of the board and district requires of them. 4.15 is a policy that every chair before me has understood and defended. It was even the last and most important point that the excellent previous board chair Tom Weber made in his final remarks to new trustees, when he advised them to never vote to continue a meeting after 9 p.m., as no good decisions are made after 9. And that is the same message that I would leave trustees with. I was therefore very distressed to see that a group of trustees is moving to try and dismantle this very important safeguard of good decision-making to further their own ambitions or their own agenda, which brings me to my short share. I hereby resign as chair and trustee of the Board of Education of School District 71, Comox Valley, effective immediately. It has been an honor to serve School District 71 and this community for the past 38 years, first as a teacher and then as a trustee. I have most sincerely appreciated the opportunity to have served. Over the last year, it has become evident that my vision and view of the direction of this board is not consistent with the majority of my fellow trustees. I have witnessed board decisions made against the best advice of senior staff and consultants. I've witnessed trustees ridicule staff during board meetings, and I've witnessed trustees, either because of immaturity or intimidation, leaving public board meetings when a vote does not go their way. This has caused me great distress and stress, and over this time has had a negative effect upon my personal health. Unfortunately, I do not see any changes that will reduce this stress. While I have enjoyed my time as a trustee and was truly looking forward to another term, these and other recent events have made remaining a hard choice. I believe this board is dysfunctional and has lost its focus and its trust over the last 2 years. But when trustees undermine the very foundations of the processes of good decision-making, then I cannot even guarantee that the decisions made by this board are of any benefit to my constituents. I find myself at odds with the direction of the board, and thus I am unable to support the decisions of the corporate board. To my mind, I cannot effectively operate as a trustee and see this resignation as my only option. I am extremely grateful to have had the opportunity to serve my wonderful constituents and the students of the Comox Valley and their families. Now, the Minister of Education has already called me personally to discuss my decision, but a copy of this letter will be on his desk and in the hands of the President of the BCSTA by the morning. I want it to be crystal clear. The problem is not in the board office, but at the board table. These are dangerous times, and if trustees continue to listen to misinformation, innuendo, and outright lies, they are being fed to support someone's personal ambitions on someone's personal agenda. That is certainly not good for students, and it is not good for the district. Now with that, I relinquish the chair to our most excellent Secretary-Treasurer, Nicole Mataki.
So I'm going to make a motion to adjourn this meeting for 10 minutes. I think that as a board, we need to go in camera and have a conversation.
I'll second that.
Secretary Treasurer, that's acceptable. I believe my motion to adjourn is non-debatable.
To adjourn or to
adjourn,
recess?
to recess for 10 minutes so the board can have an in-camera conversation.
You may make that motion, correct?
I have.
Yep,
It's been seconded.
yep.
Can we so move forward on that?
We should probably vote to make sure that the board agrees.
Okay, you're going to call the vote as Secretary Treasurer.
Do we want to vote on the motion that has been put forward to recess for 10 minutes and go in camera?
All in
Yep.
favor?
Yeah.
I'm in favor.
Okay, we're in camera.
I have a key
everyone's waiting for me to call this back into order.
Get turn your mic on, Tanya, we can't hear you.
It is on. I
Okay.
just need to do this.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so I'll call us back into order here.
She'll be right back. She just stepped down the hallway for a second.
She told us to continue.
Yes, she'll be right
and
back.
she'll be right back, yes. So we are back in. Okay, and so I am going to actually turn this back over to our Secretary Treasurer, Nicole Batante, to explain what happens next.
Thank you, Trustee Frawley. So the meeting, we will proceed with the meeting as scheduled, and we'll follow the agenda as has been set. However, I'd like to take this opportunity to give the board some information. When a trustee resigns, as Trustee Hargraves did just do, and I do have his letter of resignation, it triggers a by-election. So we will, as a district, be looking at a by-election to fill the vacancy of a trustee in Area C. I will work with the BCSTA and with the Ministry of Education on the next steps around a by-election, and I will be bringing back more information to our next board meeting for the board on what that process will look like. We now have a vacancy in the position of chairperson of the board. So for the current meeting, Vice Chair Frawley has agreed to step in as chair for the remainder of the meeting. Another matter that the board will want to consider is that the board typically holds an annual election for the position of board chair and board vice chair. Typically in November is when we hold our annual meeting and elect our two positions. With the current vacancy in the board chair position, I guess it would be up to the board as to whether or not they wanted to hold an election earlier than November. Potentially next month at the board meeting. Would the board wish to hold an election for the position of board chair and vice chair? Or if the board chose, we could wait until November when we typically hold that meeting and allow Vice Chair Frawley to remain and act in the position of chair for the remaining months. We would need to either elect or on a meeting-by-meeting basis nominate a vice chair for the meetings. So that is something that the board needs to consider. And if there are any questions or thoughts around that, we can discuss and make a decision tonight, or if we want to leave it.
In the manner of time and what's going on this evening, I think that as a board, I'd like us to reconsider this and come back another time. Continue on with Trustee Frawley as chair for this evening, proceed the meeting as normal, and then the board will reconvene at a later date to bring forth our recommendations once we digest tonight.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Do we want to make a motion?
I move that the board
Yeah.
continue on this evening with Trustee Frawley as acting chair and reconvene later date to decide next steps.
Second it. Thank you. And all in favor? Perfect.
Unanimous.
Okay, thank you. So we will continue with Vice Chair Frawley in the role of board chair for the remainder of the meeting, and this will be an agenda item at our next board meeting. And that's it, unless there's any other questions that trustees have around that process. I'll turn it back over.
Just one question is, I think it's really important for the community is that when there's a by-election, there is a cost. The cost is actually reflected on the Board of Education.
Yes.
So that information, maybe in the next little while, we can share with the community saying that, that it's just for the order of transparency
Absolutely.
to have that information as part of that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay, and I'll turn it over to our Chair Frawley.
Great, thank you. So on to presentations and delegations. There were none. Education Committee, there wasn't one. And Strategic Direction is our Superintendent, Mr. Devine.
Thank you very much. So, lots transpired since our last board meeting. After our last board meeting, it was Our plan was submitted to the ministry where it was accepted, our return to school plan. Since that point in time, there have been some changes, and I'd like to share some of the changes moving forward that we will be addressing in our return to school plan. As you're aware, on the 26th of August, Minister Fleming, in a press conference, spoke about the plans, and I've seen quite a few different interpretations of what was actually said, and in order to understand our requirements as a district, I actually was able to get a copy transcript of the actual press conference so that we could follow through and actually highlight what was said in that particular meeting. There were 4 key points in his address that I'd like to talk about that has guided the direction that we have gone down and that we will continue to, and then with some clarification. Minister Fleming made the following points. While many secondary schools will be able to support secondary students to return to a classroom full-time, there are some schools with large populations from Soup to Surrey that will offer a blend of in-class and remote learning. In a little while, our Assistant Superintendent, Mr. Manning, will share with you what that means for our students in the Valley. The second key message, it is my expectation as the Minister of Education that school districts be flexible. They will work with families to provide options to keep children connected to their school communities. And again, it's something that we've addressed, and our director, Mr. Douglas, will share the direction based on our plan and how we plan to address that comment. The third one, I've directed school districts to contact families to share their safety plans and to confirm if their child is attending school or if they require a remote online learning option. I can tell you that many of those emails continue to go out. Many phone calls are out. Most 2 schools I spoke to today had sent out a complete detail of their plan to their families, as well as attached in there, please contact the principal if you are considering options other than returning. So that work is continuing to be done, and my 2 colleagues will share their perspectives on that from the different levels. And the last one, and this was an interesting one for us, we've extended the authority to all school boards to flexibly offer remote learning programs to students within their district and local brick and mortar schools. When I looked into this statement a little bit more, it became clear not all school districts have a distributed learning program. Therefore, many of those districts, if children and families choose that option, they would be forced to leave their district, creating a potential where they're losing revenue, and the impact that would be on that district is pretty dire. By making the statement and extending the authority, now he has granted the ability for school districts to do that, where in normal circumstances, there would be an application to have an online core or school delivered. It's quite a lengthy process, but with that statement, schools, districts were able to open and keep their students, which I think is what we all would like to do at the end of the day. Keeping these points in mind, we would like to share with you how our return to school plan addresses the minister's points. When you look at the return to school plan, it appears, as we have presented it, there were 3 options. However, in fact, there's 5. And some of them are in name only, but I will explain how the 3 that we had shared with you, we talked about returning to in-class full-time instruction as being one. We talked about a DL option, which is either NIDES Navigate or out of district. And I can tell you, families have chosen to pursue DL programs offered by other districts. The third one was homeschool. The fourth one that we didn't mention, as a separate bullet because it's something that we continue to do. It's been our practice, which is immunocompromised program through Student Services, our Director Esther Schatz. This is an individual-based program where Student Services works with the school with families whose children may be immunocompromised to develop an educational program that addresses their needs. And that's always been our practice, and we will continue with that. The other part that we have been able to take is, if you look at the DL, call it remote, call it DL, it sort of seems to have quite a few names now, is that option with a neighborhood connection. These are for families. Some families still are not sure, and they may want to remain connected to the school. And Director Douglas and the Assistant Superintendent, Mr. Manning, will share how at the secondary level and the elementary level, respectively, are addressing that. I can tell you that many of the students that have been contacted by schools and families that have chosen DL have quite openly stated, we're not interested in coming back this year. We're taking a break for a year until things settle down. Where others have said, we'd like to explore that. This is brand new. When I visited 5 district sites, 3 on the island, the 2 big ones in the Lower Mainland in terms of what they're developing. This program is what they're looking at. In one district that I don't want to mention, they won't start this program until the end of September. The one common theme that all of these districts have is they are waiting on funding, because that is a critical part to running these. We feel that we're in a pretty good situation because we have the delivery that can begin right away through Navigate. The one thing that we want to make sure is we recognize that last June was extremely difficult on our teaching staff and our support staff. And we can't ask them to continue to do more than the 1.0. That is not fair. It is just too much for them to take during these times, and that we would never do it in a normal situation. So we hope that you'll be able to, through the explanation of what we're doing and how we're addressing some of our remote students in location that have to travel, what ways can we address and help them out? We think that that would be beneficial. So at this point in time, I'm going to ask our Assistant Superintendent, Jeff Manning, to share how those 5 options play out in a secondary setting.
Thank you, Superintendent Tamayo. I think we all know how it plays out in DL. We have NIDES and Navigate just strictly for a DL program, and we know how it plays out in homeschooling in terms of a parent taking on that process themselves. And the immunocompromised student home study program is something that's been happening, and it relates to a small number of students. So I'm going to focus on 2 areas. I'm going to talk about what face-to-face instruction is going to look like in our secondary schools, and then I'm going to talk about the Neighborhood Connections program and what that might look like in secondary. So I'm going to pass you out some photos, and these are photos of Mark Isfeld right here. Let me take them off. And when we're talking about face-to-face instruction, what has to happen in secondary school is that students are organized either into a cohort group or they're organized using physical distancing. And I can email this to you if the font is a little small and you'd like to look at it again later. I'm happy to do that for you. So what you see in front of you are 5 classrooms here at Isfeld. And the very first photo on the top left is a law class that has 26 students in it, but there are 4 cohorts in that classroom. So they have organized that classroom into 4 learning areas. Cohort 1 has 13 students, cohort 2 has 4, cohort 3 has 4, and cohort 4 has 5. So within that classroom, those cohorts can be put together and they don't have to physically distance. The physical distancing comes in between cohorts. So we're making sure there is space in between all of the cohorts within that class. So if we look specifically at just the first photo, what the teacher would do is they would make sure that those 4 cohort groups remain physically distanced from one another, and if they cannot, they wear a mask. And those, it's hard to tell from this photo, but those desks within the cohorts could be pushed together a little bit closer and create even more space. Yes.
Are we able to ask questions during the presentation? You'd rather wait to the very end?
Go through the chair. It's up to the chair.
I would say maybe jot down your questions. Let's ask at the very end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Things may become a little clearer when we talk about the other scenarios. So the band room, for instance, there are 34 students in there, but every single chair is separated by a 6-foot distance to maintain physical distancing in the band room, for instance. And some cohorts, it'll be easier when there's just 2 groups. 4 is probably the max that we'd be able to facilitate this with. The principal got the measuring tape out, measured everything off, made sure it was, in most cases, well, in all cases, I believe, he's actually gone a little bit more than the 6-foot distance or 2-meter distance. So sometimes the students in grade 11 and grade 12 are not going to be able to fit into a cohort. And in those cases, those students, in order to take courses that they need to graduate and fulfill their graduate program, they have to be offered those courses. And because of the number of students, if they cannot fit into a cohort model, they will be physically distancing, wearing masks wherever they cannot physically distance. And also masks will be worn in high traffic areas, in hallways, or whenever physical distancing isn't able to be maintained. We have 3 very different high schools. Some schools, like this one, students are going to be able to use exterior doors to enter and exit classrooms. So that's facilitated much more easily than perhaps a school like Vanier or Highland that only has 4 or 5 entry and exit situations. So that's how we're going to handle the face-to-face instruction. Community connections at high school is very interesting because it's something that we've been working on for a number of years. Every one of our high schools has a blended model, uses a blended model for some of their courses. And that basically means some students can take courses through a DL program, and all of our secondary schools have ILCs, which is an independent learning center, where they can actually facilitate the taking of those courses and be helped on site by an instructor for those courses. We're also looking at the potential for students in remote areas like the islands, Hornby and Denman, that we can make special considerations for having a partial week for those students where they could take some courses online and some courses at school, or even a quarterly system where one quarter they're at school, the next quarter they're at home doing online learning. We're working all the details of that out, so I don't want to get into any specifics because we don't have anything nailed down there, but we are taking that into consideration and trying to do the best we can to offer as much variety as we can at secondary. One thing that trustees might be interested in knowing is we have 179 new registrations just over the summer. This equates to 43 brand new students at high school, and that was as of 8 o'clock this morning, where we still have this week to go through, and we usually get registrations well into the first week of school, so we're expecting more than that. So those are the kind of pressures we're facing in terms of trying to get the new students into these schools and into situations where effective learning can take place.
Okay, so any questions for Assistant?
Okay, first of all, thank you. I know that you have been tasked with a monumental workload over the last little while, and I actually would like to acknowledge and publicly thank you all, senior staff. I know the ministry says one thing, and then all of a sudden everyone's scrambling to understand what it means, and the workload upon senior leadership, especially our superintendent, secretary, treasurer, all of you guys, it's been great. I'd like to publicly acknowledge and thank you all, and you're still here smiling tonight, so it tells me we're still going strong. A couple of things is cohorts. You've got cohort 1 is 13, cohort 3 is 4. Can you tell me, how do you determine who's in what cohort and what process you do to get to that? And if somebody's not comfortable, is there flexibility to maybe adjust it based on circumstances? So that's my first question. I have one after follow-up.
Sure. Most of our secondaries have all the grade 8, 9s, and 10s fully cohorted, so they will work in their cohorts. And those are based on class choice, not so much in grade 8 and 9. You can put them into grade grouping cohorts quite easily. Once you get into grade 10, 11, 12, it's a combination of the classes that the students have chosen and then cohorting them appropriately through those classes. And then the high school administrators had to go through a painstaking process of working through all of those cohorts and trying to make sure those kids, this model will actually work and fit them in. So students were cohorted based on class choices.
If I can just maybe give you an example. So if you look at the timetable, you remember the Copernican model had an A and a B, A in the morning, B. A is the cohort. So that is the group. Now, all the students in A, in Mr. Manning's English class in A block, that in the afternoon take biology, there might be 3 of them, there might be 4 of them. They are one cohort. All the A block students from a different class, that is a cohort as a whole, when they come in, they would be the second cohort. So when you see on the illustration of a classroom with 3 cohorts, it's because when the school went through and traced each of those children in terms of where they would go from A to B for their courses, that's what they ended up with. So they determined that A block would be, everybody would have 30. So in essence, when you talk about cohort size at a high school, that cohort is 30 for that first class, and then we're practicing social distancing between the cohorts where the cohorts have to mix, which falls within the parameters of the health and safety guidelines. So that's how it's a bit of a convoluted exercise, and it's quite a labor-intensive process for our schools to go through to really trace the individual students through. But you can see it in what Mr. Manning has shared with us. You can see the amount of work that's gone in to ensure that could happen.
And follow-up question. And I know while other school districts are going out and doing surveys, our district has gone above and beyond of contacting every single student, every single family personally, and thank you for that. I know the families I've talked to are really appreciative of that. So my question is, based on those connections and those conversations, do we have a sense yet of the number of students that are feeling comfortable coming back, or is that sort of still up in the air? Or those who are waiting the wait and see just to be more comfortable? Do we have a sense of where we are in those yet? Or are we looking maybe for another week or 2 to get that?
I think that will be another week or 2. I think most of the students, and their families have voted via DL if they're going to go that option, or they've indicated, no, we're coming back. And we have made all those connections with parents to ask them where they stand if they are wondering if they're not quite ready to come back. So we're working through that process right now.
And that'll be over the next week or so as phone calls continue to be made and information comes in. We'll see that. And Director Douglas will speak a little bit about that at the elementary.
And thank you very much for answering my questions.
And Trustee McDonald?
I think I'm still a bit confused. Part of it was answered by that, but I'm looking at these pictures would be for senior classes where you don't have 30 students all taking the same thing. We're already in the same cohort.
Correct.
But at our other lower grades, we would expect the 30 kids in one class to be, because this is now, we are looking at a student from cohort 5 being exposed to 120 other students because they are part of other cohorts. So right away, so then there would be children who were not going to take the risk of being in that class who could then do it online.
Right, and that's it. And it does fall within that 120 cohort number we were given by the minister.
And so this planning rate, so 120 in a cohort means that in this law 12, you're a student now connected to 480 other students.
No. The cohort is still isolated. What happens is the health and safety guidelines indicate that if cohorts cannot stay together and you have to mix, then you need to do it with social distancing between the cohorts, which is what we've done in those. Now, in the event, to illustrate your example, if a child or they can't get the course in the second part, or they're not comfortable in that, there's the option of working through the ILC
So they would still, or working remotely, do they
Yeah.
actually have to be
Yeah.
in Enrollment?
No, they don't have to.
They just need to get the work done and
Yeah.
turn it in,
Yeah.
okay.
And that's sort of like your neighborhood connection.
That could be
idea.
all part of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the other piece then is this is planning that you're doing without any information regarding additional funding through the federal government.
That's correct.
That's correct.
So the opportunities are there to see more teaching resources to bring numbers down or to do more support for students
We're,
in that area.
we're hoping
Yeah.
that as of Friday, if the announcement does come through, then we're able to look at that and how does that help facilitate our plan with the extra funding, and furthermore, what is the funding intended, where can we use that? And then what we're able to go, but we had designed this plan, we didn't want it just to hinge, we wanted to move forward. And our schools were talking about this at secondary. Danny was talking about how do they address these populations, because their population is on the fringe of being considered a large school there in that, versus say Highland. So they have, and it's not just Danny, I must say Isfeld and Highland also were working on that to see how can they make better use and give students the options, because there's prerequisites that they're trying to work with. So our admin teams have really, this is one year I think they know students' timetables inside and out because they've reviewed them so much to try and ensure that they can program them.
Any other questions in regards to high school? Okay.
I'd like to ask our,
Can I just interrupt for a second? I've just had a request, Sheila, if you could use your mic.
Oh,
We can't
sorry.
hear you. Yes.
Oh, yeah. So
Thank
sorry.
you.
I'd like to ask-
I know, I'm sorry.
Quiet, nobody ever says that.
Thanks.
our director, Mr. Douglas, to share a little bit about those 5 options as they pertain to our elementary programs.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Good. Well, before I begin about those 5 options, there's some questions that I've been getting about Strong Start. And I just want to take this opportunity to say we are an early learning district as well. Strong Start is in our restart plans in our schools. Our Strong Start facilitators we're using in the beginning of the year to help with our transitions. A lot of our little ones have not been in school since March, and they're going to help with those Ks transitioning to 1, along with all the new Ks. Then there's going to be outreach work done because we can't bring those programs and those parents into the schools. So just wanted to say that's what we're doing with Strong Start, because I know there's people out there listening wondering what's going on with that. So Mr. DeMail outlined face-to-face instruction. I think I've covered this in great detail, where our schools are divided into the 2 cohort model, and so that cohort would be around 60. Primarily, you know that the classes are going to operate as a class, but if they do decide to mix, they will only mix with the other cohort, and certainly for recess and lunchtime when they're outside playing, they have a designated play area. It's regular face-to-face instruction. They'll come 5 days a week, just like they always have done. Mr. DeMail also talked about the DL option, and I think we understand, I hope we do, that the district learning is curriculum designed by BC teachers based on the BC curriculum, and those students that enroll in that will have a DL teacher that will assist and help. And the parent becomes the facilitator at home to make sure that the work gets done. We also have the homeschool model, and in homeschooling what we do is we provide resources if the parents come to us, you know, maybe they need a textbook or maybe they need something, we can help them with that. And then the other one was the immunocompromised, and those are very individualized programs built around what the family requires. But the other one that we're calling, I'm calling it the neighborhood connections. So these are the students who have maybe registered, probably have registered at DL, but they're kind of, the families are on the fence. They're really not sure what it is they want to do. And so we want to remain connected with them because ultimately our goal is we want them to come back to school. So we want to be able to reach out to them, and some of the things that it could look like are something like this. Maybe we could have a day a week if the family's comfortable, where they come to the school and they do the learning that's happening in the classroom. So the teacher invites, welcomes them in. They don't bring their DL work. They just do what's going on in the classroom. The work that they produce in the classroom, they can take to their DL teacher, and that can be used as evidence of learning as part of their work. We're not asking the classroom teacher to prepare anything, to mark anything, to assess anything, just to welcome them, because we're really looking at the social, emotional connection. So they would be in a classroom where their peers were. They'd be in a classroom that they might have had that teacher. And it just maintains that connection. Now, we might have some families that say, actually, the reason we're doing this is because we don't want to be in a school with a whole bunch of other people. So that, thank you very much, but that won't work for us. So how about maybe could I get a phone call, weekly or every couple of weeks? And this could maybe be like a touch base. How are things going? How are you doing? Is there anything we can do to reach out and help you with? This could be maybe the classroom teacher, the principal, counselor, teacher librarian, somebody in the school that would make this personal connection. We've all learned about a whole new piece of technology in the last little while called Teams or Zoom. This is an opportunity where we could do Teams and say to the classroom teacher, if you're comfortable, could you do a Teams meeting, and team meeting that, invite the child that's at home so they can see what's going on in the classroom and be part of that for the morning or a day during the week. Great idea I got from Sherry Dietrich the other day, which I thought was a really lovely idea. Sherry said if I was the classroom teacher, I would have an iPad in my room with FaceTime on it, and I would say, okay, today it's Alan's turn. Would you connect with Sheila that's at home? Let Sheila know what we're doing today, what our assignments are, and what are they doing at home, and let's just have that connection. And throughout the time that they're learning at home, everybody in the class could have an opportunity, kind of like video pen pals. I think that's a really good idea. If the school is going on a field trip, invite the child on the field trip. Come and join us. Of course, there'd have to be some protocols around health and safety when we introduce a new student to the cohort. But we actually think all of this is quite doable, and it will just maintain that connection for that family to the school and let them know we care, we want to remain connected, and we welcome you back when you're ready to come back. So those are our 5 pathways, and I think at this point, if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Trustee Caton.
Of course, I have questions to ask. I have 2 questions, Director Douglas, and maybe the superintendent can on that one there. The last board meeting, we did make a motion saying that when the child can't speak tonight, sorry. If a child decided to stay home, we would keep a spot for them.
Yes.
We really never talked about, okay, so if they stay home and maybe come Christmas or maybe Easter, they're feeling comfortable and they want to come back to school. We didn't really have that conversation. I'm wondering if that's something you guys can touch on tonight, so that if they're staying home and things calm down, okay, what's the process of them maybe coming back? My first question, whoever wants to answer that.
And that is addressed after, that's the last part
Okay.
of this plan. That
I was just ahead.
So if you could just hold on to that,
Okay.
we'll cover it. What's your second question?
And
though?
the other one is play-based learning has been a really big part of K-1 in kindergarten, and that's probably going to have to change this. Is that going to be looking differently? And also those parents, and I was one of those parents who my son did not want to go to kindergarten. You were his teacher, Mr. Douglas.
I
You
was the
remember that?
principal, actually, and his teacher, yes.
And those parents are anxious, very first child coming to school, normally have seen the classroom, they're not quite ready on that one there. What protocols are schools doing maybe to support those parents who are
Right.
feeling first child uncomfortable and that child? So maybe touch on that.
And those are great questions, and it's questions that I've fielded at the office several times. So people are pretty understanding that a pandemic means we don't do things the way we've always done them. And so what we do is some schools have offered virtual tours of what the kindergarten classroom looks like. One of the schools right now is having gradual entry outside, so parents can actually see what's going on. I mentioned it the last time that we have purchased those little pop-up tents that you see in markets and at sports days, one for each school, and schools can organize a kindergarten area. Because remember, when the kindergartens come to school for the first few days, it's gradual entry. They come in small numbers. So the idea of the tent is there's the greeting place. Kindergarten teachers, the school administration can come out, introduce themselves, and bring the children in as a small group rather than drop your child off at the front door, we open the door, in they come, the door closes, and you don't get to come in. That's really hard for parents. So one of the things I would encourage parents who have questions is to call your school principal and say, can you please explain to me what my options are, how does the protocol work, and they will be very happy to address it.
Thank you.
Trustee McDonald?
Thank you. So a few questions about the neighbor connections piece and those parents being using DL. Just wondering, I mean, we had put some of these ideas forward at the last meeting a little bit, and about, are you in the DL registration grouping those kids more or less according to the schools they're in? I know that's something that's being done in some of other districts, and is that an opportunity, because quite a few of the French immersion parents were particularly concerned about DL not having really a strong stream. There's certainly languages, but it's, in fact, you can do any language in the world, and a whole bunch of dead ones too through Rosetta on the DL. But you know that they want to keep that. So if we're able to keep Puntledge and Rob Road as sort of somehow, you know, the students that sign up are assigned to a teacher contact, and that teacher would have some connection or would be pooling them. Are you looking at that, or is that something else that maybe the federal money would help us do?
I think when we start looking at, I can share some experiences with districts you'd mentioned, Trustee, that they're looking at these options. What they're doing is they're actually collapsing classes because there's 3 or 4 or 5, 6, or one district is not offering music or phys ed at elementary level, and they're taking those two teachers and having them be the connection. Well, we're trying to create a sense of a regular system, but so we've got to balance it out. Once if the federal money comes through and we're able to use it, we may look at all the possibilities. Mm-hmm. It becomes really difficult because some sites may only have 4 or 5 students in this situation, where other sites may have 17. And of those 17, maybe only 4 or 5 want to stay connected. So that's over the next couple of weeks. Schools will be working with their communities to try and refine that list. And I think that's why you'll see on most districts' websites, they'll say something, this program is expected to start end of September-ish. You know, they'll use dates like that just because there's so many things. And so that's the situation that we're looking at. And I'll talk a little bit about how that plays out in terms of spots and those sorts of things.
So just, yeah, the follow-up, the idea that we, you know, discount the kids that aren't in the classroom at the very beginning, and then, you know, put more kids in so that they're at the 21 or 24, whatever. Then you've got teacher that theoretically you can move over to NIDES where those kids are now registered. But I like the idea of leaving their seats open in a way, because that is one way to help bring numbers down for teachers. And we're really hearing from the teachers that smaller class sizes is an option, while having smaller class sizes by kids doing DL only works if you still have those teachers and we have more DL. So obviously that's an important piece of that. And it was, you're right, like Saanich, I think it was Victoria who were saying that in some cases there'd be a couple of schools linked together in order to make that support work. But it did seem like a really good thing to do if you can.
So I can tell you that we have not done that, collapsed a teacher and
Yeah,
the
good.
classroom and sent them to navigate. We have worked very closely with the CDTA around teachers and those that have medical situations, accommodations, and we were able to take those individuals and actually reassign them for the year to navigate, because we have such an influx of students from across the province that we need to have people anyway. So we're able to work together and have those teachers there. So to this point, and I think when we look at our plan, we haven't had to do a major restructure of any of our schools. And we think moving forward that we could be okay. And if we're done questions, I can go to the next one and sort of tie this all in. But
Yeah, no, I think you answered my question. I know you're going to answer my next one probably here too. But I think we're just kind of lucky as a district that we even have the DL option. I think that's why our rollout looks a little bit different, because unfortunately not everybody in the province gets to have this program that we have here to support our students.
thank you. Yes, I agree.
Can I say one more point before you finish yours? I know that you only wanted me to spend a little bit of time, but if I could, I just want to assure the board that our messaging in our elementary schools and certainly in our secondary schools to parents to say, let us know what you're thinking about doing. They have done that. They have called, they have emailed, and our principals have been unbelievably good at following up every single conversation, phoning parents saying, I see that you're thinking about going to NIDES. Is there something we can do? Keeping the doors open. So our principals have done an amazing job with this, and great communication, great follow-up. And I just wanted to acknowledge that and let you know that tonight. Back to you, Mr. DeMayo.
So thank you. Just a quick, short little history lesson. Many of us will remember the years of funding protection and declining enrollment. And we sat here and we said, boy, it would sure be nice if we were a growing district. Wouldn't it be great? Well, I can tell you those days are here. And the reason I say that is I want you to think, and our assistant superintendent talked a little bit about this earlier, but in the context of, as I described the next situation, think about this current situation this morning. 136 new elementary students to our valley right now, and we'll still see more. 43 secondary right now. These aren't students that are coming from a DL program that were ours in the way. These are brand new to the valley. The reason I bring those figures up is as we move forward, we have to keep that in the back of our mind. At the last board meeting, the Board of Education passed a motion to guarantee a spot for a child's home school for the 2021-2022 school year, indicating that if a family chooses a different option this year, they would have that space back in September of next year. That was the motion, and that was voted on. We feel very comfortable that moving forward, even with these new registrations that we have, we will have adequate time to plan for them. And the reason we come up with that statement is in the spring, we start doing projections, and then that leads to the staffing, where the Secretary Treasurer works with the HR, and they come up with wonderful numbers and say, this is how many teachers we need. We then sit down with principals like Mr. Colby and say, describe your class composition, and they work out how many sections they need. Well, let's just use Mr. Colby for example and say that at Miracle Beach, his numbers exceed the space that we have there. We're talking about this in January and February. We would then bring in our Director of Operation, Mr. Hesselgrave, to say, Mr. Hesselgrave, we need some space at this building or at this site. He would then work, and we would find a solution to that population crisis in that particular location. We went through an exercise where we talked about boundaries because we were in a spot where we didn't have the space. But when we're able to plan for that growth because we see it, we can ensure that we have adequate space. So the message around that is we can do it if we are aware of it. As for this year, we have been telling students and families that if they choose another option for this year, they're welcome to return to their home schools at any point. Many districts have said November, February, December, whatever dates they've chosen, whether it falls in the quarter or the 8th, where we have simply stated to our families, you're welcome to come back. Because we, as Mr. Douglas pointed out, we would like our students back in. The only thing that we have said is provided there's space. That's it. Now, the reason we have said that is, go back to the first statement I made, the 136. Fortunately, as we've gone through our list, I just want to share a conversation that I had, and I actually used it with, I'll use Mr. Colby, he's in the room, just to show you how we would determine a space availability. So we would say to a school principal, what is your space capacity right now if every one of your students comes back? And the principal would say, we have room, we could take up to 20. We've got space for 20, let's say. We would then say, okay, how many new students do you currently have? And in this case, well, we've got 18 new ones. So perfect. So we know that if everybody comes back right now, and we have the 18 new, we do have space no matter what. Where it gets a bit tricky is if the situation in one or two of our schools where we would say, how much space do you have? And they said, well, we could probably take 7. Okay. How many new? Well, I've got 11. Okay. Now, so the next question that we go to is, tell us about your current population. And they will say stuff like, well, of the current students, we have 7 of them that have contacted us, and we've had requests for their files from a DL school in a different district. Their families are signing up for a different program, PI or Heritage Christian or whatever it happens to be. Okay, so we've got those 7 going, and then they may say we have another 5 that are going to navigate, because we're able to track navigate registrations back to the schools, depending on who it is. We're then able to connect with those families, local families that navigate, because they're our students, and say to them, are you interested in these options? Tell me about your choices. And in some cases, families have said, we're choosing to take the whole year. We're just going to do the year. We want to wait till this all passes. Fine. Others have said, yeah, we might think about Christmas maybe. We might consider coming back at that point in time. So we would look at that. And the principal then keeps that in the back of their mind as they move. So when we accept students, we're trying to get us through this year, because we know the planning for next year, we can make the space. We know that. We know we can accommodate them, but it's this year. So by saying to families, we welcome you back at any point, provided there's space. The other thing that we have to consider is some of our families that are choosing to go to a school outside our district, they take the grants with them, obviously, and if they're registered in that district as of the 30th of September, and then the 5th of October or the 30th of October, they return to us, there's no funding attached to that individual. And can be problematic, because, you know, one more person, but as we have done and we continue to do, we do what we have to do to make sure that we can give them an educational program. So we're faced with that dilemma that if we allow students to hold spaces this year, for the current year, we may be forcing our new families that are the 136 that I talked about, that may not be allowed in that school this year. And we would have to, and I use Miracle Beach as an example because the closest school for Miracle Beach is Hugham. So let's just, for argument's sake, and please, this is not the case, it's just an argument, if we had a couple of Ks and we couldn't get them in, new students, because we were holding a spot. We know 2 students left, maybe 1K went to a DL outside our district and maybe another one to navigate. But if we held those spots, those 2 little Ks, we can't violate the collective agreement. So they're there. We don't have the space for them. So the next best thing we would do in a school in town is we would ask them to go to the next closest school. In the case of Miracle Beach, it would be Hugh-Band. And we all know, we went through that together in terms of what the enrollment is at Hugh-Band. If there is space, great, that we would have to do that. And then obviously we would say to that child, the following year you can come back here because we're going to do proper planning. So those are the scenarios that we work through, and Director Douglas is on the phone with school principals constantly, and Mr. Manning, around how do we achieve this? Do you know your population? Do you know where they're going? Have we asked those questions? So when we say to their families, hey, we want you back, and you can come back, the only thing that we're going to say is provided there's space. And in some, we know if everything's equal, we will have it. But the question of being able to say we're holding your space is a difficult one because of our enrollment growth. If we had our enrollment was, pretty much balanced and not many in, it wouldn't be an issue. But that's the big dilemma. Therefore, we feel that the right thing to do is hold the spot for next year as the board passed the motion, and we can operationalize that to allow new students to be placed in their catchment school, and to allow those that choose a different option to return to their school at any point this year, provided their space. Another thing for trustees to note is, and I mentioned this about students registering in programs outside our district, in terms of how that impacts funding for our local district. We are quite confident and comfortable that as we proceed over the next week or so, working closely with our schools, we will have more accurate numbers and pictures as they come in. I can tell you one conversation today, I said, so it appears you've got 11 students leaving. He said, no, 7. Spoke to 7, it looks like 2 are sitting on the fence. I think the other 2 are coming back. Those are the conversations they're having based on information. And that's why we've asked families to phone the school, to phone the principal, engage in that conversation. Sometimes it's concerns that we can address. Sometimes it's just getting a sense of what the family may need. They may simply want to wait a week. They may want to wait 2 weeks. See what happens after a long weekend, and is there any issues that we need to be aware of. So I share that with you in terms of we feel that these slight tweaks and changes address the minister's intent around the connection to schools. We're comfortable moving forward. We are also welcoming the additional funds when they do come, because we think we can use those for a variety of ways to improve the situation in all our buildings. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Trustee Waite?
I'm sorry, I turned it off. I'm so used to turning my mic on to speak. So thank you for that, Superintendent. I have a couple of questions. Some I think are still perking that aren't ready yet. Sure. It's for maybe another time. So just say I hear what you, I think I hear what you said. We've got a lot of new students. We've got potentially some spaces that are being vacated by students for a year within district or without. I think there were many parents that were going, okay, I'm going to keep my kids in brick and mortar because I know that some students are leaving and there might not be as many students in the school. So what I'm hearing is for some of those schools, those seats might be now filled with new students to our district.
Some, yeah, okay. And I'm not sure some may, right. Yeah.
And then I heard conversations about we think we can make space at most of our schools next year because we will have the time to plan. Mm-hmm. And that might work for most schools, but that might not work for all schools.
We think that, and with any of our schools, no matter what their growth is this year, we do an enrollment projection in December, usually it starts. And so I'll just use the elementary school. Director Douglas would sit down with the Secretary Treasurer, and they would go through the data that we shared, Beauregard and local knowledge, and might say to Mr. Colby, can you tell me your grade numbers? How many 2s, 3s? And we follow them through, and then we take a look at Beauregard, and a prediction is made. The next, so he might say, we need, I'm just picking numbers here, 10 divisions at school X. The next question is to the school principal, can you accommodate 10 divisions in your current space? And they would look at their space and say, I can do 9, I'm not sure, let me check one other option. At that point, our director of operations, along with the assistant superintendent and the director of instruction, will visit these sites and say, hey, I think we can make a classroom here, or no, we need to add a structure here. And that's the planning that happens in January-ish, in preparation that if we have to order a modular to address a population, it's well thought out in terms of, it's not just a 1 year, it's, is this going to be moving forward? And then we're able to meet our deadlines. So when I refer to planning, I think it's sort of all-encompassing staffing and space.
So I think I understand that. I guess it, and I guess for the one school that I'm thinking of is Huban Park,
Yeah.
where we've indicated to parents who have children there currently with cross-boundary that they have a time limit where they have to leave, that there's different layers to this. That's why I said most schools, not every school. But my final question or thought, I guess, is that we have parents who are, many of them, still on the fence about what decision to make for their child. And they might be leaning DL, thinking that, well, if things aren't as bad as they turn out to be and COVID settles down and that we do pretty good in the Valley, then, you know, I'll try DL for a few months and then maybe move my child back into their community school. But then there might not be a seat for them now. And so I think that walking through that piece, understanding the operational and wanting to fill our schools, but trying to think like those parents and families about that hard decision that they have to make, thinking that they thought that they could come back during this year, and now not being sure. I guess that's that.
I can see that. That's part of the, as I mentioned, that's part of the conversation we have with the school. We always start with, if everyone returns, can you accommodate these new ones? And that's where we start. And if they say yes, okay, we accommodate the new students, knowing that we could accommodate these other ones. When it gets dicey is where, if we're in a situation where I'm not sure, then we go and look at the list of the families and students that indicated they're doing something different. And that's where the follow-up call, you know, are you sure? So we try to do our due diligence to make sure that we're not in that situation. And I can tell you the conversations I've had with our PBPs have been quite extensive in terms of they've been able to get some reassurance. Some families have said, I'm going, we're going. And others have said exactly, we're going to try it. Maybe we'll look at Christmas. Okay. So in the back of the mind is that's the maybe list. So I think we're taking those things into consideration.
All right. So nothing further under strategic direction. There were no retirements. There weren't any board standing committee reports. And now we are going to move on to board business. Trustee Caton, would you like to move and speak to your first motion?
Okie dokie now. Ugh, I hate this mic, sorry. My recommendation that I brought forward you was prior to the Minister of Education's last announcement where he shifted the goalpost again. And so I'm not too sure if it might be tweaked, or is it still relevant? But I am going to move it anyways, and then we will have the conversation. But I just wanted to let people know as it came before that last shifting of the goalpost. So my recommendation is that the Board of Education write a letter to the Ministry of Education advocating for greater flexibility for districts in providing alternative learning options and opportunities for their students that include hybrid delivery options, and that the ministry provide full funding regardless of the student's choice of deliveries. I moved it.
Trustee McDonald?
So why I believe this motion is important and emergent is basically around the funding option. We've heard some really great options our district is doing, but there is a cost factor to it. When you're looking at lower class sizes, when you're looking at different options, we need to have that funding in place. And my concern is that with the government's budget being what it is, and with uncertainty, is that we want to provide a really robust educational service for our district, and we need to have the money to do it. And other districts are also following this route, asking for flexibility and asking for funding. So I think that we are just following what 59 other districts are doing, is ensuring that the government gives us money so our staff here can provide the great services we've heard here tonight, and allow our students the flexibility in the options, whether they want to come to school, stay home, DL, all those options, and the time. We're talking about time, and time is money. To provide those services. So that's the rationale for here, and why it's on the table.
Okay, I'm just going to remind everyone that,
Sheila seconded it.
Trustee, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I missed that.
That's okay. So just a reminder that we have 3 motions here. I anticipate there's going to be lots of discussion around them. So you'll have a 5-minute maximum, and then we will circle around to everyone to make sure everyone's had their turn, and then we can circle back if you still have something else to say. So here we go.
Yeah, thanks. Well, you know how much I always have to say about education options, and I'm hoping that over the next year we'll have a lot more conversations about what this is a crisis, and I really appreciate the insight into how much work it has been for all of you to try and tailor this system to meet the needs of every single family and student. And it is just absolutely incredible how many times you've had to reverse or pivot and just keep doing that, and it's wonderful to know how much care you're bringing to our kids. But I also think that it's an opportunity to make real shift in education in BC, that we have seen what our kids already know. They're digital natives by and large, and they also love outdoor learning. So the two things together have been big parts of the response. And that there's not to go back to the bricks and mortars of the 1970s, but actually create new models that are way more flexible and engage kids at elementary and secondary in entirely different ways. So, but a lot of it has to do with funding. So I still think, you know, this was first, we were looking at possibly being able to talk about it last time and couldn't. And the letter, the first draft that the chair last meeting suggested being written is completely gone. But my understanding too is that although the minister used some words that sounded nice in terms of blended, the messages from the deputy minister are still, there are 2 options, bricks and mortars and distributed, that we're not seeing that real flexibility of attendance that we wanted. We know the workload was unreasonable. If we want to see that those things that Alan spoke of connections, children coming in for field trips or special activities, participating through Zoom or Teams in the classroom where those skills are there and the opportunities there and there's support. Those things take funding. We hope to see them built on. So what happens with what strings or conditions might be put on this money, and the fact that really whether the federal government was going to provide it or not, the Ministry of Education in this province needs to increase the funding opportunities for 21st century learning, and we've known that for the last how long are we? We're 20 years into this new 21st century, and it still looks like 1970. So I'm very supportive of this. There is a draft letter, but it can be very much tweaked. And I think that that crucial piece of not that the funding, whether the child is in the seat in the classroom on September 30th or has registered for DL, that whatever the basis for there being a differential in funding must go back to the old days when you just got a box of paper, because DL these days takes lots of support and creativity and technology and making up for the fact that TELUS coverage is not good and all these other things that you guys have been responding with. So I'm 100% supportive of this. I think that it gives lots of opportunities for students, and the statements about, well, kids need to socialize in school, not at the cost of being able to socialize with their families and the other people that are important to them who might be at risk through this choice. So we need to think a lot more and share more, but I think that's a good start, and letting the ministry know SD 71 is on record of wanting that flexibility for our parents, that we can do it. We want them to give us the resources to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments?
I didn't really have a question,
Trustee.
but I wanted a little bit of clarification, because the recommendation was that we just write a letter to the Ministry of Education advocating for more flexibility. And last week, that flexibility was given to districts, and this meeting was applying that flexibility, correct? So,
To the extent that we were able to,
right.
under current situation.
Right. And so, as far as like conversations of a more complicated delivery, that would be something that we talk about here at a district level, and not something that we'd be writing to the minister about to request. Is that? I'm just not sure.
Can I clarify my
Yeah,
motion
of
for you?
course.
Is
Yeah,
that okay if I
of course.
clarify my motion to Trustee Howe?
Sure.
Okay, so the ministry has, you are correct on that one there, but the issue is, what we're doing is you read that, it's the actual funding portion of it. So while they're giving us some flexibility, we want to have flexibility that suits our district better to our students and want them fully funded. That's the motion of the letter. So it's not, that's why I said it may be a little bit different from last week, because the minister did give districts a little bit more flexibility. But as Trustee McDonald said, we want to have flexibility that suits our students in our district, and we want to be funded for it and have a greater sense of what we know best what's happening in our district. Let us do what we want to do for our students, and the ministry fund it within that box. So,
Yeah.
but I understand what you're saying. It's just more
I
the
just
funding.
felt, sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you. I just felt like I'm reading the recommendations, and then I'm reading what came down from the ministry, and I feel like that is what we've done. And then also with the reporting and the stable funding bulletin that came out, isn't that, like, can you explain to me, like, we are getting that funding,
Federal funding?
aren't we?
Yes. Yeah.
And,
We don't know
and
how
no matter
much.
what happens September 30th, we're getting a minimum of 98.5% of that funding from 2019, correct?
No, we'll get all of our money.
We'll
We're
get
not
all
in
of our
funding
money.
protection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted clarification, because I just was feeling, I guess, unsure. I mean, these recommendations also came prior to those announcements, so I'm just, I guess, maybe we could tweak what's in the letters to, like, be a little bit more specific about what our specific needs are, but I feel like what's outlined here is what was announced to us already, unless I'm mistaken.
Okay, thank you. We have Trustee Hawksby, and then Trustee Waite, and then Trustee McDonald.
So I was just wondering if there was clarity as to,
Just pull it towards you. Yeah.
I was just wondering if there was clarity as to whether the funds that they're giving are going to be restricted as to the direction that they're spent on, or if it's going to actually give you the flexibility you need.
We don't know the specifics at this point. There will be criteria around how the money can be spent. It will look similar to the Safe Return to Schools grant and how that money was given out and the criteria around how it could be spent. However, through many discussions with the ministry, through superintendents and secretary treasurers, there's been quite a bit of advocacy for a little bit more flexibility around how those funds can be spent, and we won't know likely until Friday when the allocations come out and some criteria are attached to those funds.
Okay, so is that what this recommendation is more about then? The flexibility of those funds is what?
You asking me?
Yeah.
The intent of the motion is that we know the best for our district. Let us determine how those monies are bound, and that having that flexibility to the needs of our district rather than being told where to put it.
Trustee Waite?
Thank you. So I support this recommendation. And I support it so that, to show that our board encourages and supports the creative learning options of our district. It encourages the ministry and the minister not to change their minds and close these options that they've indicated that we can use the money for, and to support that path that the minister was going with opening up the door.
Thank you. Trustee McDonald?
Thanks. So for me, the minister's words about where he used the words blended and flexibility, or we're still looking at students are either registered in their home school or in DL, and that the measures that are being proposed to connect them and link them are innovations at our side, at our end, but they're not students registering at Cumberland or Huban and then being able to choose to work out the degree to which they're physically present or not. So it is still not a blended option. It's still the either or, and it's got enough room that our staff are able to put in place additional ways to connect. But there's no guarantee, and there's no. I don't think it's really hearing what the impact was, and I definitely don't think it recognizes that there was a trajectory. And I think on July 29th, all of us were very surprised to find it completely erased. There's been movement more now towards it, but it was not helpful. I guess I'm interested in letting the ministry know that was not a helpful move. Tactfully letting them know.
So in closing, I'm going to say this in the nicest way. The last few months for our administrations, our principals and vice principals, secretary treasurers, and our families have been a mixed message from the Ministry of Education. The whole rollout has been change after change after change. And what we're hearing from parents is, we want to know what your school district is doing and how you're going to best meet the needs of our students. And I'm tired of the minister changing his mind depending on the flavor of the day. And I want us to advocate for our students, and I believe this letter will advocate for our students.
Okay, so we'll move to a vote then. All those in favor? All those opposed?
I'm not opposed,
No.
I just don't.
Abstain? Abstain?
Yeah, I'm abstaining.
I am also going to abstain.
Yeah, it's just a content thing.
It's still passed. I'm okay.
Yep,
It's
it's
We
passed.
will have to
Yes.
discuss a bit of process about, there is a draft, but it can be amended and it would go out under your name, I assume, Tanya, so there can be a discussion at
And-
another time about.
And
the
maybe
actual
working with
funds.
secretary treasurer and the superintendent and looking out the next messaging from the minister we have to address.
It may
So
change it
It may
again.
change it again.
That's right. Great. It's ever changing. Okay, the second motion.
So the second one is I'll read the motion, then I'll speak to it. That the Ministry of Education postpone the September 30th, 1701 student count this year as a result of the pandemic until a process reflective of the actual student numbers in schools is developed.
And do I have a second? Trustee McDonald? And discussion?
Okay, so speaking to the motion and why it's on here, a number of school districts, and I think we all got a letter from Richmond not too long ago, have asked for this. The last couple of news conferences where the minister has taken questions from reporters and that, he's been asked about this, and they've never said what they were going to do. The reason I'm asking to have it postponed is because we've heard from families they're not sure what they want to do yet. And September the 30th, I'll let the Secretary Treasurer can probably address this better than I am, is when they look at our numbers, and that's where we get our funding for the year, depending on that one. So if we don't have students in our schools as of September 30th, those families are still thinking, what do I want to do? Do I want to come back? And they want to see where the pandemic numbers are and where things are. If they come back here on October the 1st, we don't get any money for them. And there's going to be some flexibility within the government looking at that count, looking at a different process on that one, whether they survey school districts and say, well, you've got 10 students that are on the fence, they may not come back, or whatever it is. So I think this is something other school districts are advocating for, BCSD is advocating for it, and I think it's just letting the ministry know is that because our parents aren't sure what they're doing, and if the kids come back to school in October, we still have to have that seat for them. We have to have that teacher for them. We have to have all the resources. We need the money to support them. Let's find a better way to make sure that the numbers are there to support our students. So it's just a simple ask on holding the count. And I'll ask our Secretary Treasurer, do you have why it's so important to make sure we have an advocate number for our students?
Yeah, I think you covered it. Typically in previous years, it's what we call bums in seats. So as of September 30th, there's a count taken and submitted to the ministry, and that's what our funding is generated on. I know that the ministry has stated in very certain terms that they won't be postponing the September 30th count. They have talked about, and perhaps Superintendent DeMayo wants to maybe mention this a little bit, they have talked about some degree of flexibility around if parents have expressed, and we know that a parent is kind of hanging on for as long as they can and not putting their student in the school. However, we can show that we are providing some form of education for that student, even at home, until they come back close to or around September 30th, that we can count those people.
That's correct.
Yep.
Yeah, we were on the phone today, and
Yeah.
that's where they're leading us. They've normally, one of the triggers that they've always used in the past is attendance, and they have, I don't want to use the term, but put it in their mouth, but waived that or not taking that into consideration as much. And that was today, and I'm sure that as we move forward over the next few days or weeks, we will hear more about that. But they're recognizing that a lot of districts are attempting to provide something for families that are a bit hesitant right off the bat. So that was the impression I had in my phone call.
Yeah, and they've been talking, a few times on the last, few phone calls, they've alluded to that. So you're absolutely right. However, this is a motion of advocacy, just writing a letter to the ministry, and regardless of where they're at right now, I mean, the board can still feel free to write the letter requesting that they postpone it, so.
Because we know how they like to change their minds lately.
But we'd be encouraging them to do
It
that.
is, yeah.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Okay, so any other questions, discussion? Okay. So then, again, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of writing a letter? And those opposed? And
Abstaining or whatever.
do you want to oppose or abstain? Okay, so two abstentions again. Yeah.
And could we make sure BCSTA gets a copy of these letters, please?
We will do that.
So that motion is carried.
That is carried. Okay, and the third motion Again, Trustee Caton.
I'm going to move this motion, then I'm going to speak to it and why it's here and some history based on something that was said earlier this evening. The recommendation is that the Board of Education request the Policy Committee review and suggest changes to Board Policy 415 regular board meeting regarding the voting requirements for extending the length of board meetings from requiring a unanimous acceptance vote to majority in favor of extension, and that the suggested changes be brought back for discussion and consideration.
Okay, and second? Trustee Waite?
I was second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
Okay. So firstly, this motion is not saying that we actually change the policy. This motion is having go to the policy committee and having that discussion. I have been a trustee for more years than I probably want to count, but I've been a trustee for many years. And our normal rule is we end at 9 o'clock. But we have in the past, based on time-sensitive information, based on circumstances, have made motions to extend the meeting to deal with that specific motion. So we have in the past gone past 9 o'clock based on a consensus and a conversation from the board. This motion was no intention to undermine anybody's thoughts. It was no intention of mine to put my will on anybody else. It was just opening up a conversation among trustees to look at our process and having that dialogue moving forward. As I said in my letter to all of you after, there are times that we need to consider the dialogue and having that conversations, and we need to be, as a group, coming to consensus. So this was to have that conversation. It was not to say, let's change it, let's do it. Let's discuss as a board how we move on and we proceed as a group of adults, and having that conversation, because we're here supporting our students, and there are times that we need to have those conversations. So that was the intent. It was to have a dialogue to the policy committee and then move forward from there. So I like just to clarify that. And I hope no one took offense by my motion, because there was no offense taken.
Trustee McDonald?
Go first. You're fine.
Well, I support this motion. I do, of course, I've been on the board for quite a few years, and we have at various times, we did have a period where we had some quite long meetings, and this policy was in fact a response to meetings that did unexpectedly drag on, new items introduced that were not given proper consideration perhaps. So it is a good motion to have, but it also includes the provision for a vote to be taken to allow continuation of a meeting, that in sometimes you can in a half hour wrap up an item which is important. All of the staff have been brought together to have a meeting again the next day or a week later when we could reasonably do it. To me, you know, it was not the intent to ever stop this from happening. It's a decision that should be made by the board collectively. The current policy requires unanimity. And what we have found recently, you know, Tom Weber definitely as chair made it clear that he didn't think it was a good idea, but on occasion he felt that it was the right thing to do, and he let the board as a whole decide. He as chair didn't make the decision for us as to whether we felt we could deal with it. He left it to the board to decide whether we were choosing to have that, and that is something I was looking for. And we had recently found that on a couple of occasions the motion to come for us to discuss an extension, which then might be voted against, wasn't even coming. So I feel that we did need to go back and review. We may still decide that we want it to be done this way, or we may come up with something else. And matters of style or matters of personal views of how the board as the whole makes decisions on its process, rather than having them predetermined by one member, is my preference. So I feel like it was a timely thing to bring forward, and that we should still have that discussion about how we want to work together on these particular issues.
Okay, Trustee Howe, and then, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad that you brought the recommendation forward, and I think it's good to have conversations about our policies and processes when we can have some good discussion about it, for sure. I think I like the idea of everybody getting to vote for things like that, especially when very rarely do we have something super important that hundreds of people are tuned in and we just need 5 more minutes. It's nice to be able to have the option. So thanks for bringing the recommendation forward.
Trustee Waite.
Thank you. So I currently sit on the policy committee, and I'm a bit of a curious soul. So I did a little bit of research because I wondered if sort of where we sat. And I didn't have a huge lot of time, but in some boards you can't find, their information's well hidden and not on their website, so it's difficult to find. But the two that I found, one board, their meetings go from 7:30 p.m. until 11 p.m. and then if it's to go longer, it's by majority, so 50% plus one. Another board start their meeting at 7 p.m. and they go till 10, and then they vote 2/3 majority to go to 10:30, and then past 11 o'clock it's unanimous. So there's a lot of variety out there, and while our board had a practice of doing it one way, unanimous is a pretty strong decision-making tool, and so I'm going to be supporting this motion.
Trustee Hawksby, do you have anything to add?
I think it's been pretty well said by everybody. I think it's been pretty well said by everybody.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll,
I'm good.
okay. We will move to the vote. All those in favor? And opposed? And it's only because of the way it's written. But good for review, and so that's carried. Thank you. Okay, board correspondence. We received a letter from the CDTA that we've added to our agenda this evening. We would really like to thank the CDTA for their time and their perspective. We will take that letter, and did you?
No, I actually agree. It's a really good letter. I'm just wondering if we still have our liaison meeting with trustees and CTA, because this would be a really good time for us to go back and then have that connection and have these conversations, because it seems like there's a really good will to have those conversations and connections, and I'm wondering, as a possibility, if that's still happening, and maybe just take this letter and continue on through the superintendent and continue the conversations, because there's some really good points in here that I think that we need to continue the conversation on through the superintendent. I'm not too sure, but when I read it, I'm going, let's continue the conversation and the dialogue.
Go ahead.
We could set something up for sure. We could arrange for that, and I'm sure the CDTA would be willing to engage in a joint conversation. Perfect. So we can, between the president and myself, we can set something up.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. And that brings us to our public question period. So the public, if you will please, when you're asking your questions, stand up and tell us who you are, please.
And we only have 5 minutes.
We have 5 minutes.
How much of an appetite there is for the trustees of
Great, thank you, Sherry. So obviously, we will take that back, food for thought, and if we are in our letter writing mood, what our next steps are.
There are some specific references to class size and the funding.
And I also think just letters from 6 trustees and 1 school board is not going to bend the ear of the Minister of Education. I think we need to have the conversation with our BCSTA Association, because she stood up on that podium with him and she approved that message like everybody else. So I'm kind of annoyed with her too. So sorry, Stephanie, but I think our president here did a really good choice that we need to have those conversations, difficult as they may be. So I'll leave it in your hands to arrange a meeting. We can have that conversation and see where we go from next.
Perfect, thanks. So we have 1 minute left. Jen? Lisa? Lisa, go ahead.
Lisa Wagner, Vice President, Local 439. I just have a question about you're talking about support staff here, perhaps maybe, I don't know how we're going to support kids from home. If there's another option, we've got people who compromise the immune system, being told they can't go to work or they aren't able to let their doctor go to work yet. They're not being offered a job to get full pay. Therefore, the I have 55% pay. So if things would happen differently, and I echo some of what Sherry said, if there's a different way to learn, some of our compromising kids are learning disabled kids are going to work from home anyway.
Thank you. Jen?
So I've been feeling a lot of questions from parents while these meetings happen. So I was through the chair, if I could circle to Jeff Manning for just a quick second.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm hoping you can clarify just a couple of things that come up regarding the block B printing model. With mixing up the cohorts in that class with that teacher, is that teacher then social distancing from all of those cohorts? You can just kind of talk about.
Yeah, the teacher's role in all the classes will be to physically distance themselves from their students, and if they can't, they would wear a mask. But in a secondary model especially, I think the physical distancing will be emphasized for all staff.
So now, is there possible plexiglass situations in the classroom?
The plexiglass that we've placed in all our schools has done in very high traffic areas and areas where it cannot be avoided. One of the issues we have with putting Lexan in all of our classrooms is it has to be installed in a certain way, it has to be cleaned properly, and so if teachers are taking that upon themselves and bringing their own things in, we can't support that at this time.
My second question, I think maybe looking for one of the senior staff, I'm not sure, I was going to throw that out there, just some clarification, maybe this is for Evan, regarding the network connection. Will the child so chooses to come in and visit the school that class for a day or for an hour or whatever the situation is, will there be an expectation that that child is socially distanced and masked so that they aren't intermixing with the already established cohort? Is there?
What we would do, as I mentioned, is we have to have protocols around reintroducing a student to a new cohort. We would look to Paul and Russell Roy. We would say, we need you to help us write a set of protocols so it's the same and consistent across the entire district.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I am looking for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Trustee Howe. Second, it was Trustee Waite. Yeah. Thank you.